Hello again, guys. So this is now episode number 2 of the video series about Toolkit Luminosity Panel. And if you haven't watched the first one, do it first, because this is a follow-up. And at the end of the previous video, I promised that this one would get a little bit boring, and it probably will, because I'm going to explain a little bit why I made this and why I think a lot of techniques that people are teaching are wrong. Also, I'm gonna tell you why zone systems suck, which is the worst sales pitch ever. But if you watched the first video, you've seen that this can do cool stuff, so I'm not worried about boring you out. But for the educational content of this video, let's just get started. And if at any time it feels a little bit boring, skip to the next episode. So, what is luminosity? That's the big question. And there's no real answer actually to this. I like to explain it as perceived brightness, because when you look at an image, you actually only have 3 channels. There's no brightness available. There's no brightness value. There's a brightness value of red available, and there's a green and there's a blue. But the mix of these to get what Photoshop uses as luminosity for blend modes and a few of the adjustment layers, you need to do it in a certain way. So let's start by showing the wrong ways if you want luminosity. And when I talk about luminosity, it is the way that Photoshop decided that the perceived brightness should be. But it's not consistent. It uses many different ways because it has a lot of color models depending on what you do. So for example, if you use the hue and saturation, this color model is HSL. There's also a color model called HSB, and you see it here, HSB. Not to be confused though with RGB, Lab, or SMYK, which are color modes. Like you can change your image into that color mode and then the channels actually change. So I hope that wasn't too confusing, but there's no name unfortunately for the luminosity one, which makes it a little bit confusing. I don't know why, but I always use curves as example layers. But this is the color model I'm talking about. It's when you use the blend modes, hue or saturation, which then is the same as color. And of course, luminosity here is the luminosity that we want. So to show the real luminosity, you can have, let's do a solid color, desaturated color, black, it's fine. And we set it to color. And this is now the luminosity. And it's a way to mix the channels in a certain way in this color model. And the color model that is used is very important because of colors. So it might sound a little bit backwards, but the main reason why it's important is that we want the colors to behave as natural as possible. And I said before that zones suck, and they do, because in Photoshop you don't want to be using zones, because if you use it in, for example, your raw converter in Capture One that has a very good luminosity range option, then you have access to doing adjustments that are not limited to a color model. And they also have access to way more data than just the regular RGB that they provide us when we convert to edit in Photoshop. So if you, for example, are a landscape photographer, I would suggest that you don't use too much of these luminosity stuff inside of Photoshop until you get to the level where you want to really get in and tweak yourself and paint and like really do very specific adjustments. Because that's something that's not very intuitive and fast to do in, for example, Capture One. I know I talk about Capture One a lot, but it is the best raw converter, undoubtedly. It's just the way it is. Depends, of course, a little bit what camera you have. Some cameras are not just as good, but for the majority of the big brands, Capture One does such a good job. All right, so now I talked about a few color models. I'm not going to show all the examples of how different they are. Maybe a few, actually. Let's do a few. This is the color now. Let's set it to color. Now we know this is just the color. So it's a little bit advanced, but so together with this one, I'm just gonna throw the background away because it's confusing. Here in this group here, we have the black and white version, which for this one is luminosity, and in this one is if we do like this, it's HSL DSAT. I'm gonna do a few here, so bear with me and I'll show you why it's important. And I'm gonna do a new layer here. I'm gonna fill it with black, hide everything because I only want the separate copy. I want to show why it's bad to do use the RGB as the base for a brightness selection, because it's not luminosity. A lot of people think it is, but it's not. And I will show it after I'm actually able to put it here. And this effect that I'm going to show now is more visible the more different colors you have. And what else method can we use? Let's throw in we have gray. We would have to do a duplicate, but that's there's a grayscale here. I'm not gonna do it now. It's a little bit of waste of time. But there's many ways to oh yeah, we can have a black and white actually. The default values are all wrong here. So this is a typical example of how it mixes the different channels. So the yellow here is made up because there is no yellow data in this image. It assumes that the opposite of blue is yellow. but there is no yellow data. Hope that makes sense. So my OCD. I'll then show the differences here. So we have the black and white here, and let's do a couple of merges because it makes it easier for you to see then. So if we do a merge here now, this is using the black and white. And if we then hide this and do another merge here, this is the luminosity in the color model that has no name. But it's sort of perceived brightness is some word that I use sometimes, or just true luminosity. Here we have the RGB RGB comp, and for this one we don't need to do a merge, just here. And then we have the HSL version, which is the biggest difference. Okay, so now there might not be a big difference when we flip these on and off, but when you add color on top, you're gonna throw this image has a little bit of grading, so it's not the best maybe, but if you're affecting, so this is the luminosity. Again, let's put this at the bottom because I want to show the original. So this is the original. Just call it background again and delete this. Sorry if I'm going fast, but I want to show you that there is a difference. So and to be able to flip this on and off, maybe we do this into a group. I told you it was gonna get a little bit boring and to skip if you don't want to be educated, but to me this is really important because there's a lot of misconceptions, and the reason why I made a panel called luminosity is that I want to give people a quick way to use the same type of brightness values that Photoshop uses, because otherwise the colors are getting thrown off. And it might not matter if you're doing a creative edit, but for like most retouching, and at least if you have a person in it, you want the person to look like a person. Again, okay, the black and white adjustment made the image look like this. So to compare with the background, that's the regular black and white conversion. See how it changes the colors because it changes the brightness. And then we take away this one. Now we're looking at the RGB, and this is what a lot of people think is luminosity, and what a lot of what I've seen competition, or whatever you should call it, zone systems type of panels, which this is really not. They use the RGB comp, and this is it. But as you can see, changes colors. We don't want this. And then we have the desaturate one, which is the worst of the whole bunch. You see how much it changes. In this image that doesn't have that many colors, is mostly the red that gets thrown off. But if you had dark blues and or light blues or greens and stuff, would be a big difference. Because in the way that Photoshop calculates luminosity, it's not using much of the blue. I have all these values for you if you want to geek out even further in a different video on this channel. It's quite old. Not sure if I said that already. Anyway, okay. So now you realize it is important what type of grayscale image we use, because we want to keep our colors the way they are, or at least when we change them, we want to do it intentionally. Okay, so now we covered a few ways to create black and white images and what luminosity is. So yes, I think that's enough for this video, because now it's gonna be fun again. And if you stick around and you're listening to this, thank you for listening, because I think it's very important if you want to be a good retoucher, even if it's confusing, at least you've heard it. So you can refer to it if you ever get stuck in a situation and it's like, oh, Connie said something about that in his luminosity series, so you can go back and watch it. All right, see you in the next one.